House Majority Whip Tom Emmer, meanwhile, is calling to investigate a report published by the Manhattan Institute. It claims Minnesota tax dollars are being sent to Somalia and ending up in the hands of a terror group. Meanwhile, President Trump writing on Truth Social, "I am, as President of the United States, hereby terminating, effective immediately, the temporary protected status for Somalis in Minnesota. Somali gangs are terrorizing the people of that great state, and billions of dollars are missing." Jeff Paul has the story for us live from Los Angeles. Hi, Jeff.
Hey there. Well, yeah, Congressman Emmer says if this is true, it would not only be a grave national security concern, but a slap in the face to the hardworking, law-abiding people of Minnesota. This all stems back to a single report published by urban policy magazine City Journal, which is published by conservative think tank the Manhattan Institute. The report, citing unnamed sources, alleges funding that was supposed to go to state programs to help with housing and feeding people was being stolen. It claims some of that money was then sent to Somalia through a complex network where it eventually, according to the City Journal, ends up aiding the al-Qaeda-linked terror group al-Shabaab. Congressman Emmer, along with 3 other members of Congress, have now signed a letter addressed to Minnesota's U.S. Attorney demanding answers.
You simply can't continue doing this. It's one thing to bilk the Minnesota taxpayers. That's bad enough. But to ship the money to a terrorist organization, al-Shabaab, I mean, any average Minnesotan should not want to put up with that at all.
Minnesota Congresswoman Ilhan Omar spoke at the state's Capitol yesterday with other state leaders. While she didn't directly mention the allegations of that report, she responded to Trump's announcement last week that he was terminating temporary protected status for Somalis in Minnesota.
There is not a single evidence that the president or his coonies have put forth that there are any single resource from taxpayers in Minnesota that has gone to aid and abet terrorism. That language is dangerous.
A DOJ official tells Fox News it takes fraud of any kind extremely seriously, and this referral will be thoroughly investigated. Sandra?
All right, Jeff Paul live on that out of L.A. for us. Thank you.
I want to bring in Douglas Murray, New York Post contributor. Douglas, nice to see you and good morning. 1991 is when the temporary status was granted. Somalia was a mess here to call for too. Protected status was first granted in 1991 when the country was torn apart by civil war and its national government collapsed. The designation has been extended many times since, many times, more than 30 plus years. The president wants to terminate these protection orders. That's where we are.
Yes, because the City Journal report says and shows that there has been massive fraud, defrauding of American taxpayers, including of things like COVID-era loans and much more, and that some people in the Somali community in Minnesota have sent money from those schemes back to Somalia, and that some of them have found their way into the hands of the al-Qaeda-linked terrorist group al-Shabaab. This is an incredibly serious report, an incredibly serious allegation. It suggests that money paid by American taxpayers could have found its way into the hands of an al-Qaeda-linked terrorist group. And in any case, even if it is simply a case of fraud in which people were sending money from American taxpayers back to their families in Somalia, is still fraud. Somalia has been in a state of civil war for decades, but there is no reason why that should be a defense for defrauding the American taxpayer. And that's what the president has said he's going to address.
And now the big question is, where's Governor Walz? I mean, the president's directly calling him out on this.
Well, yes. And I mean, to hear Congresswoman Ilhan Omar there, you'd have thought that once again, this is purely an issue of language. She says the language about this is dangerous. It's not about the language. It's about the facts. It's about whether or not American taxpayer money and the American taxpayer has been defrauded by members of the Somali community in Minnesota. And by the way, it has to be said that if people like Ilhan Omar want to actually address problems, they should get to the facts themselves. Cases like that, the abuse of the welfare system, the abuse of the housing system, has been endemic in Somali emigre communities across Europe and other parts of the world where they've gone. It's you know, sadly, I mean, people bring certain things from the culture that they come from to the countries they come to. And if they come from a very, very very violent country where there has been enormous amounts of defrauding and much more going on, and they come to countries like America, then sadly some of those members of that community will continue those kinds of practices. That's something that anyone representing the Somali community in America should address, rather than attacking the language or anything else.
I find, maybe this is a coincidence, maybe it's not, but I find it interesting we're talking about this topic today when there's reports about U.S. Special Forces in northeastern Somalia today on the ground going after ISIS-linked members in northeastern Somalia. Here's Chris Rufo talking to Laura last night about his reporting.
I'm told by sources in Minnesota that there are dozens of these fraud schemes. There are investigations that are underway now. This might just be the tip of the iceberg, and this is probably the highest density of fraud anywhere in the United States. President Trump took the right action. I think a lot more needs to be done. He needs to review all of the refugee and citizenship applications for the Minnesota Somalis.
He throws a lot of things out there that need answers now, Douglas.
Absolutely. One of the things is, if people are claiming that they need to be in the United States or other Western countries because of asylum, that they are fleeing the violence in Somalia, then why would they come to countries like America and then send money back that fuel the very groups that are destabilizing the country of origin? It makes absolutely no sense to justify that or to allow it to continue unaddressed. At the very least, people like Governor Walz have to address this. This is not an issue of political correctness or of language or anything else. It is about whether or not the American taxpayer has been defrauded, and then the next one, which is whether or not we are being defrauded in America by people who are then using our kindness and our desire to give people, our generosity and much more, against us. In any case, this should be addressed, but in this case, it's particularly serious because there's a national security problem. Why should American troops be addressing an issue which is not being addressed here at home in places like Minnesota?
Douglas Murray, thank you very much. Good to see you.
Thank you, Douglas. More to come on this.
Hey, it's Will Kane. Click here to subscribe to the Fox News channel on YouTube. It's the best way to get our latest interviews and highlights. And click to subscribe to the Will Kane podcast for full episodes right now.